For the first time in a long time, we need to start this report with a disclaimer. Do not keep wild animals in your backyard. How this situation managed to go on for so many years before someone died is absolutely astounding. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and start this outrageous tale from the start. Aqil Fakhr was an Iraqi native that lived in the city of Najaf in southern Iraq all of his 50 years on this planet. He didn't have a massive compound stretching several acres, just a large backyard in a regular neighborhood full of families with kids that played football in the street. If anyone looked over his rather low brick wall, they'd have seen that the backyard was filled to the brim with metal cages, every single one of them holding a different species of exotic animal. Sometimes the neighbors would hear birds of paradise that twittered and squawked. Other times there'd be the unmistakable growl from a feline predator, or barks and yips and bays from some unknown beast. The only thing they knew was that whatever was making the noise, it wouldn't be around for more than a few hours before being replaced by another. Aqil bought the animals at a young age, trained them, and then sold them off to collectors for a profit. How he managed to do this is a gaping question that no one's been able to answer yet. Iraq does not grant exotic animal ownership to just anyone, and they're notorious for taxing any outside species so heavily that it's not financially feasible for the majority of the population to keep any unusual pets. And that's being done with very good reason. The government feels that if you cannot afford the heavy taxes, then you cannot afford to give any animal the appropriate feed, care, housing, and most importantly, to set up your property in such a way that they cannot get out into the streets. So how Aqil was able to afford the taxes and to fly under the radar when it came to his wildly unsafe enclosures is a complete mystery. His walls were too low, only 4 meters high in some places. There were no double lock gates for each animal and no security measures like cameras or electric fences in or around his yard at all. Naturally, most believe it was completely illegal, but he'd been running this operation for decades and all of his neighbors knew about it. So it could be that authorities were aware of Aqil's unusual business venture, but that they never bothered to enforce safety regulations. Who knows how he managed to do it for so long, with so many safety precautions completely ignored and no overseeing body to regulate him. If we're being honest here, it's a miracle that this terrible event hadn't happened years ago. Whatever the case, Aqil purchased a young African lion sometime in May of 2025. It was old enough that its mane started coming in. By lion standards, that's barely an adult. Judging by the photos, he would have been around 2 years old. Aqil gave him a few days to acclimate to his tiny prison, getting him used to the fact that this man always brought food and clean water. Aqil had done this a few times before with a dozen lions in the past, as well as tigers and other predatory cats. After the first week, when they stopped frantically pacing their cages and realized that the metallic stick that Aqil carried hurt if they got too close, was all he expected of them before he'd lead them out and start training them to tolerate humans, to walk beside them on leashes and to allow them a bit of freedom to stretch their legs around the tiny lawn. 6 days into feeding and talking to his new purchase, Aqil decided it was time. He chose the hottest part of the day when lions are most docile and fed the animal just before so that he'd be extra lazy. A neighbor next door who was having tea on his roof watched from above as the new arrival took his first tentative steps outside of his metal bars. The neighbor had seen this procedure happen many times before. Just another day with his strange but kind neighbor and all of his equally strange animals. Aqil had the whipping stick in hand, and when the feline stepped out, several things happened at once. 4 falcons in the cage in the far corner screeched in unison. A pair of foxes yipped in another, and 2 zebras bawled in panic. There wasn't even a nervous mule or an uncertain sidestepping from the lion. The reaction was instant. Not only was it out of its claustrophobic prison, the world had only erupted in chaos around it, switching on its fight or flight mode. Naturally, any male lion would choose to fight. The moment all 4 of his feet were outside the gate and Aqil was next to him with that damned painful stick, that animal exploded with rage. It turned on its owner with grace and speed that only felines possess. Aqil raised the thin metal bar and brought it down on the lion's face, but he might as well have used a fly swatter. It had no effect on the animal at all. It drew its body back and pounced on top of the man who was still trying to beat him back with the flimsy stick. Aqil crumpled under 220 pounds of adolescent lion, screaming louder than the zebras in the corner. Its aim was pinpoint accurate, right on the jugular. Aqil's scream of terror was cut off instantly. All he could do was to grab onto the lion's sparse mane, feebly attempting to pull it off as the life drained out of him. Up from the roof, the neighbor's teacup shattered on the floor and he sprinted downstairs. The moment the animal pounced, he was on his feet, reacting with nearly as much speed as the lion he just watched grab his friend around the neck. As he headed out the door, he grabbed up a Kalashnikov rifle from his military days and loaded it as his sandaled feet carried him outside. Like an Arabic action hero, he jumped onto an old storage container to look over the fence. He wasn't stupid enough to launch himself over that wall with a raging lion in the yard, but it did put him in the perfect position to keep his firearm pointed at it if it tried to escape and to yell for his wife to call authorities. By the time he reached the wall, Akil was already silent. His formerly gray dishdasha was now completely scarlet, torn to shreds and indistinguishable from the ruined ribbons that used to be Akil's face and neck. The neighbor knew that his longtime friend was dead. No living man would flop and flail that way while the cat shook him back and forth like a dog's chew toy. It took 20 minutes for police cars to swarm the street, completely in disbelief about the call about a rampaging lion in a residential neighborhood. The rest of the street was already cleared of playing children and pedestrians because the neighbor continued to yell from his perch at the wall, spreading the news as far as he could without moving from his position. In the 20 minutes since the attack happened, the animal had already gulped down most of Akil's thigh, a great part of his abdomen, and it had consumed parts of its captor's buttocks. When police arrived, they unsuccessfully tried to coax the lion away from the body, hoping that they could tranquilize it. The damage was already done after all. But when it started eating at Akil's lower back, they realized that the animal intended to devour the man completely in full view of a wall lined with no less than 30 officers and an ex-military neighbor. The decision was made to open fire. It took 7 rounds before the lion dropped dead. Ironically, it was the neighbor's final round that found the lion's head that administered the kill shot. And to this day, he still believes that if he'd just killed it in the beginning, without waiting for police to arrive, at least Akil's family could have buried him relatively whole. Instead, they got a ruined corpse and a box of mushed bone and flesh that had to be taken out of the lion's digestive tract. The Iraqi government still hasn't commented on why Aqil had managed to run this operation for so many years. Clearly, he'd never been subjected to an inspection, nor was there any concern about it happening in a neighborhood where families with children lived. He had to have gotten the animals in from somewhere, and he sold them to people in other countries. If this was all legally done, then why on earth were there never any safety inspections done? And if it was illegal, why would an entire neighborhood not report him? It almost doesn't matter which is the case. If this went on for so long, then it's almost certain that there are others doing the same exact thing too. And Iraq is sitting on more caged creatures without the proper care that they deserve. Living, breathing, ticking time bombs, just waiting to exact upon their captors their deadly final affliction.